Hey there, I'm Boxer, and welcome to the first video in my Ark Nova strategy series. I say series because I was going to make one video, but after it started coming together, I realized it was going to be way too long, so I'm going to make several. Um, so who is this targeted for? This is not meant to be a how to play Ark Nova video or series. It's really intended for people who have already played a few games, maybe a lot of games, and are really looking to get better. So I'm going to share the strategies that I use as a Masters player, unique to my playstyle, because the great thing about Ark Nova is that there is a lot of different playstyles that can be very successful. And you'll see a wide variety of things that different high-level players will do, but they're all pretty successful with it. But I think the most important thing is to recognize that there are a lot of different approaches, and being versatile and understanding all of them and recognizing when certain moves are strong in certain situations or weak in others, and being able to execute all those different strategies in the correct situation is what's really going to help you improve to those higher levels. So I myself, as of recording in this video, I'm at my all-time peak of 739 ELO at 12th currently on BGA. And so I recently competed in Emu Cup Season 1, which Propaganda Panda put together for the community. He invited 16 of top-rated players to compete. So I played 20 games through this, 15 games against each of the other players once in the group stage, and then best of five that went 5 games, or I lost in the quarterfinals against JD here. So because I think Ark Nova is heavily dependent on the game state for how good cards may be, I'm going to try to talk about the different concepts using examples from the games that I played throughout the Emu Cup. So these are high-level games showing you as it happens. But before I get to some of those examples, I'll do a couple videos just to establish a baseline level of knowledge of the game. So with this first video, I'll get into statistics first, give you an idea what is it that Masters level players do different than your average player. And then I'll do a couple of tier lists to evaluate, in a vacuum, what cards are stronger than others independent of the current state of the game. And then, once we step through different situations and concepts, hopefully you'll be able to evaluate and see, maybe this D tier in this situation performs more like an A tier card, or perhaps an S tier card is totally useless in that situation, right? So those are the things that you need to consider when you're playing Ark Nova. Tiers lists are a good starting point, but they are not an automatic always play S tier cards and always avoid D and F tier cards. Everything is situational in this game. And then once I get through this baseline level of knowledge, I'll step through what are some of the early game goals that you'll want to establish through the game, mid-game decisions you might find yourself needing to make, and how you're going to want to close out the game. And all throughout this, I'll talk about how to evaluate the current state of the game so that you can figure out what are my best options in terms of which animal should I be playing, which sponsor should I play or not play, which project should I aim to be supporting, and commonly asked question, what upgrades should I be getting and when, and what project rewards? So with all that said, let's step into some statistics. So first thing you'll notice for high-level players versus the average player is turn counts is typically lower. Myself, compared to the top 25 players, I'm actually a little bit slower in terms of turn counts. There's certainly a number of things that affect this. Certain maps don't enable as fast games as others. And there's a bit of playstyle in there too. If you're a person that likes to play more sponsors, that's going to draw out the game longer. And I think I do tend to play a bit more sponsors than other top players. I think also the fact that I don't have as many reps in the new alternative maps, which I believe are faster maps for games. But this is something you'll see as a difference in all high level players versus the average players, that they just get through games faster. Because if you play more efficiently, that's what's going to happen. The game's going to end faster. Another thing you'll see pretty consistently is that high level players will break more often than average players. So that's one of the hardest things to get a hold of as you get better in the game is recognizing when's the appropriate time to push the brake and when's the appropriate time to stay in the round and milk it as long as you can because you're getting more efficient actions than your opponent. And I feel like when you're starting out, a lot of people really have a hesitancy to trigger the brake and they want to milk every round for as much as they can, even if your opponent is getting more out of it than you. That's when it's a mistake. All right. And so another interesting thing to look at is how many actions are people taking throughout their game. So obviously with an overall lower turn count, all of the actions are going to be less per game. Obviously, less turns, less actions total. But something you'll notice here, even though I have a faster game than the average player, I'm still taking about the same number of association actions as most players and pretty close to the same number of animals actions, right? The things that really goes down mostly are build actions and cards actions, or cards actions. Those numbers go down quite a bit because high level players will find ways to avoid doing those actions because building buildings and drawing cards, those are actions that are not scoring you points. So if you can find ways to not be wasteful with your build actions, get the cards you need, then you can take the time to use clever animals, clever effects, building placements, just Xing actions back and spending those X's on the actions that are scoring you points, which are animals and association, and do those more often. So that's something you'll see pretty consistently across all high level players is just really minimizing those build and cards actions if you don't need to do them because they're not scoring you points. This is something that you'll see the money gain stat can be a bit different across different high level players. Some will be higher than average, below average. I tend to be lower as I tend to try to play more efficiently and that I want to play more sponsors that get me more value, sponsors that get me cash, sponsors that make my animals score more points, and also trying to do a lot of projects, getting a lot of project rewards. Those are all things that will help you to score more points without necessarily spending more money. And so that's why my money gain stat is lower than the average player. But you'll see other high level players that have money gained, higher than the average player. That could be maybe they just prefer higher income strategies. Um, they upgrade build a lot, they build a lot of kiosks, they take the 5 money reward a lot, or maybe they just push the brake a lot and they have a lot more games that go to 5+ breaks. Speaking of that, another thing to keep in mind is, I breezed past this number of breaks triggered, but something to keep in mind is that the average game goes about 4 breaks before it ends. It is possible to end the game after only 3 breaks if you find a lot of cards that give you a lot of high income or just give you incredible amounts of value, sponsors scoring you 10+ points, because that's free, it doesn't cost money, and just high value projects, supporting a lot of projects at 5 conservation points. That's what can push you down to 3 breaks, but that's pretty uncommon. Most games are going to take about 4, maybe 5. If you go past 5 breaks, you definitely have more than enough money and workers available to cross that finish line. So normally you want to push a higher number of breaks if you have really expensive animals to spend it on. Let's see. Then the other interesting thing to look at, differences between high level players and average players is number of what do you spend your association tasks doing? Like I said, animals in association, they score you points, but also, there are association actions, taking a partner zoo, taking university. They don't necessarily score you points, but they do get you upgrades. And you'll find that higher level players will have lower numbers in terms of how many partner zoos, how many universities they take. One being just being more comfortable closing out games without getting all 4 upgrades. Possibly maybe more comfortable with a playstyle where they take a worker at 2 conservation points, in which case you're limited to 3 upgrades. Um, what am I talking about? That's unrelated to this. That actually helps you do more associate tasks. But point is, higher level players may be more comfortable going through the end of the game without taking all their upgrades and skipping these partner zoos and universities and instead opting to do more projects which are going to score you points. So that's another thing you'll see. High level players will do more conservation projects than the average player. I tend to be on the higher end, doing more than 4. Um, and then this is where you'll see the most disparity, I think, between players is what are your preferred upgrades to get through the game. So mine aren't particularly unique compared to other top players. Actually, my animals is the lowest of all of them, but that's not something I endorse really doing. I'm not sure why my animals upgrade is so low. Um, but there are situations where you can get away without upgrading animals, but I would say it's pretty necessary in most games to be able to just pump out lots of animals and pumping out big animals that are going to close out the game for you. I'll talk more about this later for appropriate situations where you may not upgrade animals. Builds, there are some people that are just want to upgrade build every game. If you're relatively new, usually this is the first one you're going to go for, but there certainly are a lot of players that really do minimize how much they upgrade this. And there's a certain play style to it that you have to get comfortable with to be able to get away without upgrading build, without running into roadblocks, sort of, finding yourself not having enough enclosures for the animals you want to play, or getting choked out of certain regions of the map because of those upgrade build spots. So there's quite a variance there, and that you'll see a lot of high-level players do that's close to 100%, and some that might get as low as 50%. Cards is something I think I'm a bit on the lower end of upgrading. I think recently this has been dropping for me. Personally, I've been finding it less and less necessary for me to upgrade, as I think my playstyle has started to move towards grabbing more partner zoos and skipping universities. And when you skip universities, you find yourself a bit lower in reputation, and that takes some value out of what you would get out of an upgraded cards action, being that you're not getting to the upgraded section of the reputation track. I also do like upgrading sponsors, so this is something you'll see a big difference in between a lot of players. A lot of players like to upgrade this a lot. A lot of players really don't and upgrade it pretty rarely. But I do think the sponsors upgrade is very strong, whether you have cards that require it or not. Just doing it for the extra money also perfectly valid. And then upgrade is the one I upgrade least. I personally see it as a way to really dump excess X tokens and money for the most part. And in some cases, that extra worker at 3 partner zoos can be useful. But I usually find myself wanting to do other things with my money, so this is usually not high on my priority list to go for an association action upgrade, but it's got its places where it can be quite useful and powerful. All right, so those are my general thoughts on the most significant statistics that'll vary between high level and average players. I also want to take a look at how that varies from a 4-player game. Because what I'm going to be looking at, the Emu Cup was all 2-player matches, right? And most high level players play pretty much just 2-player matches on Arena. But there are some differences when you get into 4-player. So over the past year, I did join 2 4-player tournaments on BGA and went through a number of games with that. So I pulled the stats I had through 16 games played in those 2 4-player tournaments to see what's different about my stats in these 4-player games versus player games. So through these 2 tournaments, I pulled 16 games I played through them. I had 14 first places and 2 second places, no thirds or fourths. And I feel like it could have been a 100% win rate, but these tournaments are an asymmetrical map format. And so, I think this one was a finals. Being 4th player certainly hurts, and then playing Research Institute against the winner, who had, I think, Silver Lake, and only beat me by like 3 points. So that one was pretty close, and then my other second place really, I was just feeling pretty cocky and picked Hollywood Hills, which, spoiler, is the worst map that you can play. So what I found interesting, um, looking at my stats through these 16 games, right? One, my average number of turns is way faster. So you can play, yeah, 3.5 turns faster on average for these 16 four-player games. Now, granted, the format of the tournament, you do have a choice between two different maps, so you'll see a lot of Silver Lake and outdoor areas on these. So that skews it a little bit, but still, that's a pretty significant difference, averaging under 30 turns. Then number of breaks triggered, I also thought was pretty interesting. I trigger a bit over two in two-player. You would think doubling the amount of players, I would have about half that, but mine's even less. So looks like I find ways to stay in the round and get value. I think that's what I tend to do. And four player is set myself up to always be having something to do, even if the break's not coming. Yeah, and then related to number of turns, even though I'm going 3.5 turns faster, I'm actually scoring more points. So we'll come back to that as I look through more stats here on what's different in four player. And then if you look at number of actions taken for each action, obviously all the numbers are going to be lower if you're taking a total less number of turns. But as I mentioned before, what you'll see, the turns that are still maintained higher is animals in association. So those are only going down by half per game, whereas the others are going down a bit more. And I was actually surprised that I was taking so much less sponsor actions through these games. And what I thought was interesting about that, go down here a little bit. Where is it? Played sponsors. So even though I'm taking less sponsors actions, I'm playing the same number of sponsors, um, which is interesting. I guess that's also related to me causing the break less, is those lesser number of sponsors actions I'm taking are spent playing sponsors. I am taking X tokens instead of actions a bit more in these four-player games, so that accounts also for doing less of these actions, less sponsors, less cards, less builds. And then here, you know, as I was looking through the two-player stats, I already mentioned I tend to gain less money than the average player, but in four-player, uh, I am way less, even more so than that. So let's see, where am I getting those points? We'll get to that. Also noted spending less money on enclosures by itself doesn't look all that unusual until you look at built enclosures down here. I'm actually building more enclosures than normal while spending less money on them. And that tells me that I'm taking the two size project reward a lot more often in these four player games. Drawing less cards from deck, I don't know if I really have a good explanation for that. I'm not sure where I'm getting the cards I need to end these games, but somehow making it work with less. Already talked about played sponsors. Typically taking less workers, right? A bit closer to three. I think that might also be part of the map choice. Playing a lot of Silver Lake and outdoor areas, those don't have a 2 CP bonus for taking the last worker. Normally the incentive to go for the fourth worker is that extra CP. So maps like Ice Cream Parlors are maps where you want to go for it, really just for the extra points. You generally want to aim for three by the end of the game so that you can support two projects in a round. That's usually my goal. And then four if it gets you extra points. And then this was a pretty big one here in that taking way less partner zoos and universities, and instead now my conservation projects per game is closer to five, right? And so I think this is the biggest difference in four-player versus two-player games, is that you have more base conservation projects available to you, and the slots aren't blocked. On top of the fact that there's three other players that could be drawing projects and throwing them up on the board for you to support. So you could find yourself in the mid game with five different options of projects you can support. So this is something that I think I take advantage of a lot in four-player games, is just having so many options for projects and just constantly doing projects, getting rewards. And I think this is the biggest thing that accelerates your game and is just made easier by four player. But that is certainly also achievable in two player if you get lucky with the cards lining up and getting the draws to find all those projects. Right. And so along with taking less partner zoos and universities, I'm getting way less upgraded actions per game. So that's something as you get better, you'll find being comfortable going through a game without certain actions upgraded will really benefit you because not having to spend a worker, spend a turn on grabbing a partner zoo that's just going to upgrade something that you may only take one or two more times for the rest of the game. Um, that's something to consider because if it's the difference between getting an extra project out, that could be a huge point swing. And then overall action upgrade rates, I'm actually surprised I upgraded build 100% of the game. I feel like lately I've been trying to drop that, but it is what it is. What I did find interesting is that my cards upgrade rate went way down. It's close to 50%. And I think that also ties into taking less universities. You know, averaging just above one means that there's probably a lot of games where I'm just totally skipping universities, which means my reputation will be pretty low, and so there's just not as much incentive to upgrade those cards actions. And then the other thing that takes a hit is association. Like I mentioned before, it's the one I upgrade least already, and so if I'm going to skip out on some upgrades because I'm taking less unis and partner zoos, um, you know, seems like association and cards are the ones that I'm typically going to be cutting out. And looks like I maintain my sponsors pretty close to where I normally have it. And so there you have it. That's a look at stats. That's what, in general, you'll see as a difference between Masters level players and average players, both in 2-player and 4-player. So, if your goal is to do a bit more 4-player, keep these things in mind as I talk through the rest of my videos, because those are really going to be focused on 2-player. So, yeah, stay tuned, and next I'll work on a couple of tier lists, and then I'll start jumping into reviews of my Emu Cup games. Hope you enjoy.